Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about the 4 books of Moses. Of course, you'll be wondering, isn't it the 5 books of Moses? And the answer is yes. It's the 5 books of Moses and it's the 4 books of Moses. Because with the conclusion of the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, which we will conclude this week, that brings to an end the entirety of the written Torah as God spoke and communicated this message to the Jewish people through Moses. Moses was only a mouthpiece. He was like a microphone. The microphone doesn't transmit things that were not said into the microphone. It doesn't have a mind of its own. Moses did not have a mind of his own. He was the most humble person, and humble does not just mean the person says, "Well, I'm no big shot. I'm not so special. I'm like everyone else." That's a form of humility in the true sense of the word. Humility is where you recognize that everything is God, and you are totally subordinate to God, totally devoted and surrender your own ego, and having zero ego. That was Moses, and no other human being ever came to that level of humility the way Moses had, as it says in the Torah that Moses was the most humble person on the face of the earth. So when God spoke to Moses, he spoke through Moses. That's the 4 books of Moses. Then there's the 5th book, which they call Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is based on the description of the 5th book in the Torah itself as Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means the repetition of the Torah. What Moses is doing at the cusp of the Jewish people's entry into the Promised Land, he's reiterating much of the teachings that were given in the 40 years before that. So it's a restatement of the Torah, but this time Moses is doing it through his own language and his own mind and his own interpretation. True, it was with divine inspiration. Moses, even when he was acting as his own interpreter, was interpreting things with divine inspiration, but he was no longer just a mouthpiece. Now, why do we need a 5th book? Why did he have to reiterate everything? Because when God communicates directly, it could be over the heads of the people, because it's so powerful. It could be intimidating, or at least overwhelming, and people will not be able to absorb it. So when Moses takes the Torah and he brings it into his own language, he's making it accessible to everyone. So yes, it's the 5 books of Moses, but it's also the 4 books in which Moses acts as a communicator, as a transparent conduit for God's teachings to be revealed to the people. And the 5th book is where Moses uses his own intellectual capacity, divinely inspired for sure, to make the teachings of the preceding 4 books accessible. So this week we conclude the reading of the 4th book. And whenever we conclude a reading of a book, it's customary for everyone in the synagogue to declare 3 words: Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek, which means, in English it's more than 3 words. It means be strong and may we be strengthened. So how many words is that? Be strong and may we be strengthened. So that's 7 words in English, but in Hebrew it's 3 words. Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. Hebrew is a much more concise language. 1 word could be translated into English in 2 or 3 words. Like the word v'nis chazek means and may we be strengthened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words in that 1 Hebrew word. Hebrew is a unique language, but that's for another time, another discussion. We say these words because we want the study of the Torah not just to be an academic study. We want it to be a study that invigorates us, that gives us strength, that gives us power to meet all the challenges that go along with living in a world, trying to implement the values of the Torah in the world. So we conclude a book, we declare, be strong, and we will all be strengthened. Now this week we have a double portion, 2 Torah portions. There are a total of 53 portions in the Torah. 53 is the numerical value of the word gan, which means garden. That the Torah is like a garden. It provides us with all of our nourishment, everything that we need, and all of the delights. Just like in a garden you'll have beautiful flora, beautiful fruits and vegetables. Torah is the ultimate source of nurturing and of sustenance for us. So there are 53 Torah portions, but how many weeks are there in a year?
52.
Not in a lunar year. In a solar year you have 52, but in a lunar year lunar year is 354 days, or 355, and that gives you 50 times 7 is 350. So it's 50 weeks and another few days. Now we have 53 Torah portions. So how do we conclude the entire Torah reading in 1 year? So in a leap year, we have a leap year where we add an extra month every few years, 7 times in a cycle of 19 years. We add an extra month, and that way the lunar calendar evens out with a solar calendar, so that eventually the lunar and solar will come out at the same time. If you have a birthday today is July something? July 21? Okay, July 21, and it happens to be the 25th day of the month of Tammuz. Now, next year, the two will not be the same. But in 19 years, at the end of a 19-year cycle, those 2 days will come out at the same time. The July 21st and the 25th of Tammuz will be the same day, every 19 years. Sometimes it works out a little less than 19 years also. Sometimes every 19 years it'll be like that. It could be off by 1 day for astronomical reasons, but it's usually the same day. So how do you accommodate 53 portions in a year that's not a leap year, where you have only 50 weeks plus a few days? That's why some portions are doubled. They're doubled portions because we have to fill in all the 53 sections in a year that only has 50 weeks. And this is one of the doubles. But it's not clear why certain ones are doubled more than others. There are only a fixed number of doubled portions. So if you think into it, if you reflect on it, you'll see that all the double portions are paradoxes, are opposites. Judaism has a tremendous amount of paradoxes. What is a paradox? Where you have 2 ideas that seem to be contradictory, but they're not. They're really 2 sides of one coin. And what is the paradox here? The name of the first portion is Matos. Matos means tribes. This was addressed to the leaders of the tribes. Now, the root of the word Matos is not tribes, is really sticks or staffs, a branch of a tree that it becomes hard, turns into a stick, because a leader is someone who has a stick with which he leads, with which he directs his flock. So the word for tribes is matos, sticks. What is a stick? A stick is something that's firm, that's solid and firm. What's the name of the second portion? The second portion is Masaei. Masaei means journeys. It describes the journeys of the Jewish people in the desert. Those are opposites. A mata, a staff, is something solid, something straightforward, straight and firm, doesn't bend. If you take a staff and you try to bend it, you'll break it. It's not meant to bend. A branch on a tree you can bend, but once it turns into a staff, it can't be bent. It means someone who is consistent, who doesn't change, someone who remains totally consistent to one way of doing things. Masaei, which means journeys, has the opposite idea. You're constantly moving from one place to another. because Judaism is based on both, combining both. There are certain aspects of life, of the guidance in our lives, that it has to be like a staff. You cannot bend it. You cannot change it. You can't say, well, today it's a valid, let me just mute everyone. Today, what the Torah tells me today is valid, but tomorrow it's not important. Torah does not change. Or some people will think the Torah was given 3,300 plus years ago. Well, it was for those days, but now things have changed. We're living in a different era, so the laws don't have to be the same. That's what some people argue. But just like no one would argue the law that you shouldn't commit murder, do you think that changed? Once it was a law that you shouldn't commit murder, but now it's okay. Some people think that way, but we know it's ludicrous to think that the law against murder had changed because 3,300 years passed since God gave it in the Ten Commandments. It doesn't change because God doesn't change, and God knew the future. When God gave the Torah 3,300 years ago, He knew there'll be a 21st century. He knew we'll be living in modern times where there'll be modern technology, there'll be AI, there'll be internet, there'll be all these new developments. He knew of all this. If He didn't know, then He's not God. He should give up his identification as God. God transcends time and space. So the Torah doesn't change. And there's a little cute story about the idea that Torah doesn't change. There was a rich merchant who had to transport his merchandise from where he lived to the place where the market would be, where the fair would be. That's where he sold all his merchandise, and that's how he made all his profit. And that's what brought him wealth. So he hired a coach driver. This is in the days before cars, and we had horses and wagons. He hires this coach driver, and he says to him, I want you to transport all my merchandise from this part of Europe to that part of Europe, wherever it was, and I'll pay you handsomely for it. But I want you to give me a guarantee you'll get there in time, because if you come a day late, that's it. It's the end of my profit. I'm going to be ruined. And the man says, absolutely, you could rely on me. I give you my promise, my guarantee that the merchandise will get there by the date that you asked for, maybe even sooner. So they travel, and they have to go through different areas of Europe, and it started to snow. And the snow kept on piling up, and the horses couldn't make it through the snow, and things were delayed, and it took him a few extra days, and he came late. And now the coach driver, who worked very hard to travel from point A to point B, says to the merchant, I want you to pay me. And the merchant says, I'm going to pay you? There was a guarantee given that we would get there in time, and you didn't keep your side of the bargain. And the man says, what do you want me to do? I don't control the weather. It's not my fault that the snow kept on piling down, and I deserve to be paid because I worked hard. And they went back and forth and decided, let's go to the rabbi. The rabbi will be the judge. Whatever he says, we'll follow. So they go to the rabbi. The rabbi hears both sides. He goes into his study, and he does research in Jewish law. He studies the Talmud and other sources of Jewish law. He comes back and he says to the coach driver, I'm sorry, but you're not entitled to get paid because there was a guarantee. The guarantee is solid. You cannot complain. I feel bad for you, but what can I do? The man doesn't owe you the money. The man had a major loss. He should have to pay you as well for his loss. And the coach driver got very upset. He says to the rabbi, tell me, what did you base your decision on? He says, well, I based it on the teachings of the Torah. He says, when was the Torah given? He says, it was given in this year. And which month was it given? It was given in the month of Sivan, which corresponds to June. Oh, the Torah was given in February, in January, February, it would have been different. It was given in June when there's no snow. If the Torah had been given in the winter, the Torah would be more sensitive to my needs. Of course, that's a story. It's a humorous story, but the idea is that the Torah doesn't change. It's matos. It's a staff. It's a stick, and it's what guides us. And it doesn't bend. You can't bend it. That doesn't mean that there aren't times when the Torah's laws doesn't apply, but that's part of the law itself. Just like we observe the Sabbath when on this Saturday. On Tuesdays, we don't observe the Sabbath. That doesn't mean the law changed. Saturday night comes and the law changes. No, the law was given for Saturday, not for Sunday, not for Monday. There are times when the Torah itself tells you when the law applies, when it doesn't apply. Let's take killing. You're not allowed to commit murder, but in self-defense, you're obligated to commit murder. You're obligated to defend yourself. In a time of war, you have no choice. You have to fight in order to save yourself. And even the Torah even recognizes the death penalty in extreme cases, although it's very rare, but it does recognize that there is such a concept of the death penalty as a way of punishing a hardened criminal. So the laws don't change. That's Matos. That's what the first Torah portion represents. The second Torah portion is Masaei, journeys. That when it comes to our spiritual lives, we should never stay in one place. And when it comes to doing good, we can't say, you know what, I did enough good today, I don't have to do any more. Or tomorrow, I was good yesterday, tomorrow I don't have to be good the next day. I don't have to grow. I don't have to do more and increase in my goodness. There is no limit to how good you can be. It's like climbing a mountain. A person is trying to climb Mount Everest, and he climbs halfway. He says, look, I climbed halfway. It's good enough. I'll stay here. No, if you stay there, you're not going to survive. You better get to the top and get down, of course. But when you're climbing a mountain, and life is like a mountain, you have to keep on increasing. Now, it doesn't mean you add on more commandments. It doesn't mean you do something that God didn't tell you to do, although there's an exception to that, which we'll soon talk about. But it means that you have to add, if you're holding at one point, there's 613 commandments. If you are able to do only one, that's great, that's wonderful. God doesn't judge you everything or nothing. He judges us by doing everything, ultimately climbing that mountain to that point. That's the goal, that's the destination, but you get to that destination one step at a time, and you have to keep on growing, you have to keep on increasing. You don't add on new commandments that the Torah didn't give us, and I'll soon explain what I mean by that, but you have to keep on adding on to your own commitment. And then even if you do let's say you do all 613, which is an impossibility because we don't even have the ability to do all 613 now, because the temple doesn't exist, and we're waiting for the temple to be rebuilt to do that. But let's say you do everything that you're capable of doing physically, you could still add on in depth, in feeling, in enthusiasm, in excitement, in the spirit of the law. A person could pray to God and say the words without any feeling, or very minimal feeling. A person has to keep on adding on. A person could study Torah, and they could study day and night, and yet they're not studying they're using their full capacity of their intellectual abilities. They're not using all their energy to study Torah. In other words, there's no limit how far a person could journey from one place to another. We're constantly moving from one place to another. Now, the Torah portion of Matos, the one that talks about the leaders of the tribes, this is about a commandment concerning speech, about people making vows, oaths. When a person makes an oath or a vow, God tells Moses to tell the leaders of the tribes, to tell the people that you are obligated to keep your promise. Now, what is an oath or a vow? In Jewish law, it's when you make a promise and you invoke God. You swear to God that you will do something or not do something. Not only are you obligated to keep your word, but not keeping your word is one of the most serious violations. In fact, it's one of the 10 commandments. Don't bear God's name in vain. Because when you make a vow, what you're saying essentially is that God is going to be my guarantor, that I will keep my promise. Don't mix God into everything you do in a way that you're not going to do it. Because not only, if a person makes a promise without God, it's bad enough that you renege on your promise. But if you bring God into it, you're insulting God by making him the source of a lie. It's the only commandment I can think of in which you get God to participate in it, in the violation of the law. A person commits murder, he's doing it in spite of God. A person steals money, he's doing it in spite of God. But when a person swears falsely, They're swearing it because of God. They're committing the crime because of God, because if they wouldn't mention God, they think people won't believe them. So they mention God to strengthen their promise. So they're making God an accomplice in their own crime. That's why it says in the Talmud that in spite of all the 10 Commandments being very serious matters, committing murder, when God commanded us not to take His name in vain, the whole world shook. It destabilizes the world. Because when you bring God, who's the source of existence, of life, and you make Him part of your immorality, you're destabilizing the world, and it's a very serious transgression. But there's something unique about this. In the oral Torah, when the Torah was given, it was given in a written form. Moses was told on Mount Sinai what to write, and God also gave him an oral interpretation of the laws. And most of the laws in the Torah cannot be followed if you just follow the written text, because they're cryptic. They're not really clearly enunciated. For example, it says in the Torah you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath. It doesn't say what rest is. Does rest mean you're supposed to nap throughout the day? Some people do that, but is that what it means? Does it mean you can't go to work? What about a rabbi whose main day of work is on Shabbos, is on the Sabbath? That's when he gives his sermon. That's when he leads his services. He's working. He's getting paid. No, that's not what the Torah obviously means. Well, what does the Torah mean? It doesn't say in the written Torah. But in the oral Torah, it says that there are 39 categories of work that may not be labor. Labor is where you have to strain yourself. If you told me to schlep this table up and down the stairs, that would be labor. But on Shabbos, that's not included in the 39 categories. That's not a good idea anyhow, for many reasons, but I won't go into them right now. But the definition of work follows the oral tradition. Likewise, it says in the Torah you're supposed to punish a person an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Did any Jewish court ever do that? No, never. Why? Because the oral tradition said it doesn't mean literally an eye for an eye. It means the value of the eye for an eye, the value of the tooth for a tooth. How do you estimate the value of an eye and a tooth? That's a separate subject. The Talmud discusses that at great length. So virtually every part of the Torah has an oral tradition. I'll give you another example, not from a law, but from a story in the Torah. We know Adam and Eve were the first human beings. They had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain had a child. Who did he marry? The only woman that the Torah mentions was Eve, his mother. So there's an oral tradition that they had twin sisters, and they married their sisters. That in that time, incest was not forbidden, and they married their sisters. But it doesn't say that in the Torah. It's hinted, there is a hint to it, but it's not a hint that people would recognize unless they knew the interpretation without the hint. So the whole Torah that we have, there's a written Torah and there's an oral Torah. The oral Torah says something about vows, that if you made a vow, you promised, mentioning God's name, that you're going to do something for someone else. You're going to help them. And then you realize that you can't do it. Something came up, someone in your family needed your help, and you had to take a trip someplace else, and you couldn't help the person you promised, and you swore, using God's name. There is a way of renouncing, of annulling that vow. That's not mentioned in the written Torah. It's mentioned in the oral Torah. How do you do that? You go to 3 rabbis, and they will ask you, if you knew when you made the vow that the situation would change and you would not be able to do it, would you have made the vow? And if the person answers, no, I wouldn't, then the rabbis have the power to annul a vow. Now in Judaism, there's no such thing as a rabbi who has the power to give you a dispensation for not observing a law. If someone comes to the rabbi and says, look, you're not allowed to eat pork, but I like pork so much and I can't afford any other meat, can I eat pork? The rabbi has no power to change the law. If your life is in danger, then you can, the Torah says you could violate any of the law, virtually any of the laws. But if the life is not in danger, the rabbi has no power. There's one exception to that. The rabbi has the power to annul your vows under certain conditions. That's in the oral Torah. Now, why does the Torah give the rabbis that power? So one commentary says because God did not want a person to think that he's God. God gives us commandments, and we could give ourselves new commandments. We create a new commandment, and we make a vow, and we're duty-bound to follow the promises that we made. So the Torah says, you're not God, because this is different than any other kind of law, which you can't renounce, you can't give up on and not observe. Every law that is there is matos. It's there forever. It can't be changed. But when a human being creates an obligation, those obligations can change under certain circumstances. They're not etched in stone the way a other commandment is etched in stone. Why would a person want to make a vow? The Talmud talks about people who want to commit themselves to doing something good, but they don't have the strength, they don't have the willpower. Let's say I want to commit myself that I'm going to volunteer, 10 hours a week in the hospital. I'm going to do some good. I want to do it, but I know I'm weak. I know my character and my personality is a weak personality, and I'm going to get lazy, and I'm not going to do it. So what do? I make a vow. I say, and they use the words, they swear to God that they're going to do it. That's going to give them the strength to do it, because they know if they don't do it, they're in big trouble, because they violated a vow using God as his witness that he's going to do it. So it's a way of giving yourself more strength, more energy, more support. It's a crutch. Some people say that religion is a crutch. If you're handicapped and you don't use the crutch, you're a fool. Sometimes, yes, sometimes what God tells us to do is a crutch that helps us strengthen ourselves, and this is what it is. Making a vow is really considered to be a crutch that gives you support. It energizes you. It gives you some spiritual energy that allows you to carry out what you wanted to do. That's the idea of a vow. Now, Yom Kippur comes, the Day of Atonement, and the first prayer that is sung very solemnly, and it's what brings more people to the synagogue than perhaps any other event, is called Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre is not about atonement. It's the Day of Atonement. It's how we begin the Day of Atonement. It's not about atonement. It's not about God. It's not about following the commandments. It's about annulling all of our vows. Why would we start Yom Kippur? And it's very solemn to annul our vows. So there are many, many explanations, and I'll just share one explanation. When a person makes a vow because they want to do something good, that means they're weak. They're morally, emotionally weak, and they know that they can't trust themselves. So they take a vow upon themselves that gives them support. But Yom Kippur is a day when we don't need that support. The day is such a holy day. It's such a powerful day. It's the Day of Atonement. It's the day that God forgave the Jewish people for worshiping the golden calf. It has so much power in and of itself, you don't need the crutch. The crutch you could throw away, because the day itself has the power of support, and you don't need the crutch to give you that support. Another explanation is, sometimes, and this is human nature, that if you want to make commitment to do something that you haven't been doing, going on a diet, what do most people do? Tomorrow I'll start. They push it off, and next week is a good time, but I'll wait for the beginning of the month, or I'll wait for the New Year's. And then, of course, it doesn't last very long. Why doesn't it last? Because by postponing it, you're building in a weakness into your commitment. You're saying the commitment is not really that solid, so I can afford to postpone it for tomorrow. And I continue today to go by my bad habits of the past. On Yom Kippur, we tell God, we don't need vows, we don't need oaths, we don't need support. Our commitment is now. We're not postponing it for later. We're not relying on some type of postponement. It's something we're changing right now. This minute we're changing and not waiting for the future. To change the subject, later on, Moses was fighting the last battle. He's told that after this battle he's going to pass away. And a group and the Jews are all going to travel into the promised land by a different leader. Joshua will be the leader. And the Torah talks about how the different parts of the land were divided amongst the 12 tribes. 2 of the 12 tribes come to Moses and they say to Moses, we have so much cattle, and where we are now, the east bank of the Jordan, is a perfect land for grazing. It's a wonderful place for us. We want to stay here. And Moses explodes. He gets angry, and he calls them rebels. So you're acting like your ancestors, your parents, who didn't want to go to the promised land, and you're doing the same thing. Are your brothers going to go ahead and fight the battles, and you're going to stay here? And they said, Moses, no, you got us wrong. That's not what we meant. We're going to go ahead of the soldiers into the promised land. We're going to fight ahead of everyone. We will take the highest casualties. And then after we finish the battles and the land is divided up amongst all of our brethren, then we'll come back and live in this side on the east bank of the Jordan. But meanwhile, we'll build cities for our families, for our cattle, and we will cross the Jordan with everyone else. In fact, we'll go ahead of everyone else. And when Moses heard that, he said, oh, that's a different story. Why did Moses get so upset? Why was he so upset? He could have listened to them. They would have explained what they had in mind. So the reason he got upset is because there was a philosophy behind their words. It wasn't just about cattle. Their fathers, who didn't want to go to the promised land, was for a different reason. Not because of cattle. It had nothing to do with cattle. It had to do with the fact that living in the desert was the most blissful spiritual experience that you could have. Because in the desert, they had all their food coming from heaven. They didn't have to worry about agriculture, about planting food. The clouds that surrounded them, we discussed this in many times, the clouds that surrounded them protected them from all their enemies. If anyone shot an arrow at them, the clouds would deflect the arrow. Their clothing grew with them miraculously. It was laundered through the clouds. The clouds were the first dry cleaners. And you had every opportunity to just live a spiritual life, to meditate, to study. There was no need for anything else. You didn't have to fight wars. You didn't have to work on the soil to be a farmer. And these were very spiritual people. These were people who wanted to live in a spiritual cocoon. And that was proven to be a mistake, a big mistake. Judaism is not living in a cocoon. It's about taking the spiritual and translating that into the physical world. Yes, we want people to be spiritual. There's a time for that when we pray. Our souls get closer to God. But then we have to bring back that inspiration down to this world. Those people who didn't want to enter the land didn't feel that way. They just wanted to be spiritual. So when Moses hears these 2 tribes saying, we don't want to cross, in his mind he sensed that they were saying, we want to be shepherds. Why shepherds? Because shepherds also don't have to work very much. They're not planting, they're not working on the ground, they're not fighting. They're very peaceful type of work. They weren't lazy, but they wanted to live a spiritual life. And Moses says, you're repeating the same mistake as your fathers. Haven't you learned a lesson? Just to share a little story about Moses not having the patience to hear their full proposal. He attacked them right away. As soon as they said, we want to stay here, he attacked them. Why didn't he wait? Why didn't they explain it? They should have said, Moses, don't rush to conclusions. We have an explanation. We're going to come back. We're going to go there and come back later. So the story is told there was a Hasidic rabbi in Poland who had a grandson who was a very precocious child, brilliant scholar, and he had a study partner with whom he would study. And one night they were up all night studying, and the next day he came late for services. So his grandfather reprimanded him. He says, "How could you do this? How could you sleep so late and not come in time for the services? If you're going to do this, you'll grow up to be a nobody." He really laced into them. And the grandchild was silent. He didn't defend himself. So later on, his study partner said to him, "Why didn't you tell your grandfather we were up studying? He would be very proud of us." He says, "My grandfather was giving me words of rebuke. They were so delicious to hear them from him. I felt so fortunate to have a grandfather like this who cares so much for me, who's trying to encourage me. I'm going to interrupt his criticism? I love the criticism." That's the ideal, that a person should not find criticism to be distasteful. If a person is sincere about the criticism, they're not just trying to put you down, they're trying to help you, constructive criticism, you should always be receptive to it. So the same thing happened with the people here. When Moses was criticizing them, they were happy to hear Moses' criticism, because it doesn't hurt you when you know that the person is doing it out of love, and you take it to heart. It only strengthens you. But there's another explanation one can give why Moses was upset at them. Even though they were willing to cross over the Jordan, and Moses probably realized that, he didn't like the way they'd expressed themselves. "We're going to build our homes here, and we'll cross over there." What do you mean here and there? You're members of the same people. There's no here and there. There's no Buffalo and Jerusalem. For us, it's all the same. We're all part of one nation. We're all part, and it doesn't make a difference that there's geographic distance. That's a secondary thing. We are all part of one people. And when something goes wrong in Israel, it bothers us, not because we feel bad for other people. They're not other, they're part of us. And that's why Moses was upset at them, because it sounded from their language that we have our destiny, they have their destiny, and we're going to help them. No, it's not you're helping them, you're helping yourself. It's all one nation, it's all one people. When the Torah, one final thing, when the Torah talks about the journeys, the Torah begins with the words, "These are the journeys of the children of Israel that left the land of Egypt." What does it mean that these are the journeys? These journeys were not just journeys from Egypt to Israel, because it says these are the journeys that they left Egypt. No, there's only one journey to go out of Egypt. The minute you cross the border, you're out of Egypt. And yet it uses the plural. These are the journeys that the children of Israel left the land of Egypt. Because every journey, until we reach our destination, we're still not out of the first place and not out of Egypt. Because what does the word Egypt mean? And Egypt is an English word. The Hebrew name for Egypt is Mitzrayim. In Arabic, it's also similar to that. Mitzrayim has another meaning besides Egypt. Mitzrayim means confinement. When you're confined, you have a fence around you that you can't get out of. You're in Mitzrayim. You're in straits. You're a prisoner. You don't have to be in a country called Mitzrayim to be in Egypt, to be a prisoner. You don't have to be in prison to be a prisoner. Whenever I would go to visit prisoners in prisons, and I had to talk to them and give them a little bit of uplift them, their spirits, I would tell them that you could be more free in prison than many people are outside of prison who think they're free. They're not free. When a person becomes a drug addict, they're not very free. They can physically move around, but they're prisoners to their addiction. And drug addiction is only one addiction. There's so many addictions. Addictions to technology, addictions to this telephone, addictions to
Caffeine.
What?
Coffee.
Coffee? It's not one of. It's one of the better. It's one of the better addictions. It's one of the healthier addictions, actually. But whenever we're addicted, we're prisoners. Whenever we live our lives oblivious to what's right and what's wrong, you're prisoners to bad ideas, to bad values. So you could be in a physical prison and be free, and you could be in a open area and be a total prisoner. So when it says that these are the journeys that they went from the land of Mitzrayim, it doesn't just mean the physical land of Mitzrayim, Egypt. It means getting out of every one of those different things that confine us. And the Baal Shem Tov once said that the 42 journeys that they made here, that are listed here, describe the journeys that we all have in our lives. Our whole life is about journeying, getting from one place to another. And as I said before, it's not enough to stay in one place. Even though it was good for today, it's not good for tomorrow. Tomorrow requires you go out of the next Egypt, the next Mitzrayim. And ultimately, until we get to the Messianic age, we're still in a form of Mitzrayim, and we have to journey from there to the next point until we reach the destination.